Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome at this 12th edition of TKI Wind op Zee Live. My name is Sophie van Hoytema, and I will be your host for the next hour. The offshore wind industry arrives at a challenging point. We already use nature's force to produce electricity, but can we even achieve a positive impact on nature? Well, in this episode of TKI Wind op Zee Live, we'll explore the limits and the possibilities of offshore wind farms and their impact on nature. Birds and bats, that's what we're going to focus on today, I think, with our guest here. Of course, feel free to ask some questions if you want. You can do so via the chat or in the comments on LinkedIn. Please do so. We'd love to hear your comments and questions. Before we dive further into the subject, let's welcome our guest here at the table today. So, first of all, welcome Ingeborg van Splunder. You're a biologist, program manager at WOZEP, Wind op Zee Ecologisch Programma, the research program for ecology in the North Sea. So, your program collects data about all life on, in and above the North Sea, uses knowledge and among other things to ensure that activities in the North Sea do not harm nature as much as possible. Did I say that right?
Yes, about right.
About right. What's
yeah.
not right about it?
Well, all life, that's a bit broad spectrum,
yeah?
But I can tell later a bit more about it.
Okay.
Yeah. And I work for Rijkswaterstaat. Maybe that's...
You work for Rijkswaterstaat. Very good to know. Thanks for that addition to that introduction. Thank you and welcome. Also welcome at our table, Sibylle Giraud. You're Vice President of Wind and Environmental Practice at Robin Radar. Is it Robin? How do you say that?
Robin Radar. Yes.
Oh, Robin Radar. Very good. Your company provides radar systems that can track birds and bats in and around wind farms.
Correct.
Yes, and it also provides a solution to act on the birds present and close to the wind farm, doesn't it?
Yes, we can have also a shutdown on demand. So that's one of the way to actually protect the birds as well.
Yeah, so shutdown on demand, yeah, if something happens. Okay, good. We would love to hear more about that. Welcome, Sibylle. And then the other side of the table, we have Tim van Oijen, Senior Policy Officer at Vogelbescherming Nederland, Dutch partner of BirdLife. Tim, today we would love to hear from you everything there is to know about BirdLife on and above the North Sea. And you are in regular contact with companies that are active in the North Sea, such as wind farm builders and managers, are you?
Yes, definitely. Of course, as Vogelbescherming, we are focused on protection of birds on the North Sea as well. And in the North Sea Agreement, the Dutch North Sea Agreement, important agreements were made to have a transition of energy while at the same time protecting nature. And this is the key area where we focus on to have these agreements, to have it in place. And there we work together with the wind energy sector and other stakeholders.
And also all the nature organization, you collectively work together, don't you?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, very much so. Yes.
Good to hear. So we would love to hear some more about that a little later, because first of all, I want to welcome first Tim. I want to introduce our loyal support, our rock, Bob Meijer, of course, Director of TKI Wind op Zee. Welcome. Let's start with you, Bob, by setting out for the audience what this issue is all about.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sophie. Today I'll not start talking about wind turbines or foundations or cost reduction. We'll be talking about migration paths of birds. And you can see the animation here that shows the migration path from south to north. Also, of course, vice versa. And if we zoom in to our North Sea area, you can in fact see that this crosses the areas where we are talking about if we talk about offshore wind. Also on this visualization, you can see the red and yellow areas, basically representing the density of seabirds. And of course, the red then shows higher density, population densities. And superimposed on that, you can see the existing but also the planned offshore wind farms. And immediately you see a striking overlap there. And this is why this is such an important topic. And we see the potential impact of offshore wind farms on wildlife, such as birds. And of course, we have to work with that. And I must say, historically seen, of course, there is impact from various sources on birds and also on bats. Not just offshore wind, also from onshore and other offshore activities, there's impact. But given the enormous upscaling of offshore wind, I think this has really been put on the agenda in terms of marine spatial planning. And so very important topic that we'll be discussing. I think it also requires a more holistic view. Of course, we're now focusing on everything above the waterline, but there's also, of course, wildlife below the waterline. And these are, of course, interconnected in this ecosystem. And on, say, below the waterline, we've got a lot of, say, mitigating measures already, like noise reduction systems for piling noise. And we can even create a positive impact on biodiversity with the scour protection in wind farms. But above the waterline, it's more complex. And I'm looking forward to the discussion in this webinar about this topic.
Okay, let's start then immediately, because in the first part of this discussion, we'll talk about what's already been done to limit, compensate or mitigate harm to wildlife at the North Sea. And in the second half on this broadcast, we'll have a look what the possible directions are for solutions, because the matter is still only at the early beginnings. So let's start with Tim. Tim, can you tell us a little bit more about the effect of wind turbines on birds?
Yes, sure. Well, first to start with major effects on especially the collision. So birds can collide with a wind turbine. What you see here is that they can be up to 200 meters high. Many birds fly at that height. Some birds fly lower, such as the northern gannet, who stay close to the water surface, but many other birds exactly fly at this height range. And since the tip speed is about 280 kilometers per hour, up to that speed, it's possibly that it's a fatal collision, of course. And recent research of the University of Amsterdam showed that also during the autumn and spring migrations, a large part of the birds fly at this height. So there you can also expect that they will collide with these rotor blades regularly. So what we would need is a curtailment measure during these periods of the year. And next to that, other solutions that we could have is that you could heighten the distance between the surface and the lower tip of the blade, so that species like the northern gannet could more easily pass. So this animation is actually focused on collision as one of the key effects of wind turbines. But next to that, also birds can avoid wind parks and the wind farms. This means that they stay away from it very far. Like the red-throated diver, it stays away from it when a new wind farm is there. So this is also a key issue, because then they lose habitat.
Yeah. Okay, so that's both the collisions and the loss of habitat.
Yes. Yeah. And another effect is that if you have several wind farms next to each other, you can even get a barrier formation. So that birds, for example, migrating birds might need to take a deviation route and fly much further, and they lose a lot of energy. So this is also a reason of concern, although we don't know enough about it yet.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for this explanation and the concerns, of course, there are. Ingeborg, let's go to you, because your program tracks the state of wildlife at the North Sea. What can you tell us about the current state of nature on the North Sea? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah. You see, what you said, that we look at the state of the different species that are there. There's a drawing that shows all the species that are affected by offshore wind, and we merely try to understand what the ecological effects are, so that from the relations you can predict future offshore wind scenarios, what the impact might be. So we collect knowledge, we develop knowledge So the policymakers are able to make decisions about future states.
They can make the right choices.
If you have the knowledge, and it is difficult, it's rather difficult. The things that Tim just told, we're trying to get more information about the collisions and about how much energy it might cost if there's habitat loss. And the tip height, we try to do research to collect flight heights of birds, so we have more, be more sure about, what the best adaptations will be. And in that research, we do cumulative effect assessment, and that is a way to see what the state of the species is, more or less. And then you can make an assessment of a future scenario for offshore wind parks and the effect on the population side of different protected species. And so that's the way we work. We try to understand the effects, try to predict future scenarios and say, well, that will affect that species in that way. Yeah. So this one's very vulnerable, this one is too much affected, and this one are still in the clear.
Okay.
So that's...
What do we see on the screen right now? It's
that's the way you can make clear what the distribution of species is, and that changes during the year. So you have the planning of the wind farms in the North Sea countries for, this is a scenario for 2030. And you can see that the kittiwake, it moves around in the whole area. So not all year round it has the same influence of the offshore wind parks. And the same is for the other species. They are just examples to show...
How do you study...
you study how the results look and what you can do with it for spatial planning. Yeah. So spatial planning is where it starts with what are the most vulnerable places and what is the best place to put the offshore wind parks. Yeah,
so you avoid interrupting their life.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I've just learned the words in English for bruinvis, porpoise, I think. Porpoise.
Harbor porpoise.
And for drieteenmeeuw, the kittiwake. Yes? Yeah. Well, we know that in English now. Thank you very much, Ingeborg. Let's go to Sibylle, because your company partners in a lot of research projects on bird behavior. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and what the main results are?
Yeah, I think it's a very good follow-up from what Ingeborg was saying, because we do assist in some of their projects to actually provide the tools to be able to collect such a data. So our radar are actually able to give the heights of all the birds that we track on the 360. So it's a new technology, and that's been used to be able to do such things like the modeling, also for creating and to be able to forecast some of the impact or when the bird movements are going to happen. So to be able to get a full understanding of what is happening in terms of all the phase of the projects, from pre-construction to during construction as well, and also to be able at some point to actually mitigate by creating a shutdown and demand depending on the high level of the intensity of the birds that are flying across. So it's very much we are working with UvA as well, with a university, or we work a lot with environmental consultancies such as Bureau Waardenburg in the Netherlands or NINA in Norway, by providing the tools to be able to get all the data in real time, but also to do the research and the analytics after that.
Yeah, so you need this data, don't you? Also, Ingeborg.
Absolutely.
Very good. What are the next steps for these radar systems?
There's a lot of next step, and I think Bob knows the radar is not, unfortunately, just the magic wand that you can pull and that will give you all the answers. You need to probably adapt it and actually make some synchronization with other sensors as well, such as camera or acoustics or visuals data in some cases, because the radar can use a classification per size. So the resonance will give a classification on your size of the birds, but it doesn't give you the answers in terms of your species, which is something that everybody is trying to actually get the holy grail in terms of we want to see the bird, we know we can understand them, but now we need to go to the further step, which is actually combining all the data that we have with the radar with being able to single out species and bird tracks. So we are working toward that direction, but we're very happy to say that we can already like differentiate birds and bats, because so far they were bats were seen like small birds on our radar classified, but we've done some lately some research with some company in Croatia to be able to actually see the difference in terms of the tracking of the radar. So the tracks have got very different data, and from that you can filter to try to recognize, so you predict what kind of a bird track it will be. But it's still, at the infancy, I would say, of the development, and we are still a long way before we actually completely there. But it's very exciting in terms of the developments. Yes.
Yeah. If I can add to that, I think these techniques should help us further in getting more knowledge on how birds use the North Sea. There's still a lot of knowledge gaps, and also how wind farms impact on their behavior.
So what would you really like to know?
Key wish is which species are where and when. And this, of course, this species, defining the species, recognizing the species is a key challenge. And other techniques may also help or give additional information. There's also a system called the motor system, and you might be able to tag birds with a sensor, and that can be recognized from ground. And if we place enough antennas in the North Sea, then we might track these birds, and you would have more species-specific information. But also further radar development might help in that. And another big wish is that we actually start seeing how many birds collide with wind farms. I think if this is where we want to go with the energy transition, we should invest much more in getting a real feel for what's happening. And there is a possibility to connect different types of sensors, use radar and combine it with other techniques to actually do measurements of which birds collide with a turbine blade.
So you say there's already that you can make joint effort. You already do that?
Yes, we already use that in some of our projects that we work across the world. So we're already combining the radar with camera, and also with the monitoring of bird casualty, for example, in Asia at the moment on some offshore wind park as well. So this system actually is a Dutch system also from TNO that is used to do that, to monitor the number of collisions. Yep. You can already have a combined holistic approach with different sensors and camera, the radar, and other sensors as well.
It's still it's still very difficult to measure collisions. Hardly anyone in the world does that.
Absolutely. It's a sensor in a blade. So at the moment, because the radar, we lose a track. So basically, the turbines are providing some resonance as well. So if the tracks go closer to the turbines, and at some point the turbines will create more resonance, so the tracks will be lost. The radar is clever enough sometimes to put the tracks together, depending on the number of rotation that you will get in between, to be able to follow the tracks. But sometimes you do lose it as well. I would say around 30, 40 meters of your turbines, and very often you will lose your tracks.
Okay, so that's still hard.
Yes, that's why we need a combination of that's.
And to what extent do these radars already help you, Tim?
They help a lot. They are key information for the predictions that are now being used to estimate what is the impact of wind farms on the North Sea. So WOZEP, the program, does important work for that. There's, I don't know how you say it in English, the kader ecologie en cumulatie.
The cumulative effect assessment.
Well, so that is important. So those are the calculations we use, the modeling we use to predict what will be the impact on specific bird species. And it's lots of modeling based on some data we get from radar and other techniques, satellite, GPS measurements of birds, to make predictions on what will be the impact, but it's still largely based on modeling.
I think it's
go ahead.
I wanted to add that there's a difference between the massive migration of the passerines, I think you call them, and the small birds, and the prediction when there's a massive migration, and then you can shut it down, and the radars have an important role in that. So that's one group with their specific behavior, and they just fly over. They don't use the North Sea.
And then you said you can close the wind farms. Then.
Yeah, you have to do that at 48 hours before because you have to have an energy peak, etc. But that's one story. And on the other hand, you have the birds that live at the sea. So the sea and coastal birds, the bigger ones, and you use radars also in combination with cameras, and they have collisions. But they're different subjects for study. And if you have the massive migration, you don't know what species it is. They're all small birds. They're enormous numbers. And for the larger birds, there is more. I think that in that area, there's more possibilities to combine with cameras and automatic images recognition. I think that's the direction we're going to.
Because for migration, the radar alone can actually, I would say, be able to send the trigger to the turbines because it's on intensity. So we see the birds coming, we see the heights, we send the signal through the SCADA system. It will slow down or shut down your turbine, and then you can restart when it's actually safe to do so. But as you say, for a specific species, is much more complicated, and that's where the work is going at the moment. So for migration is kind of we can say we kind of have ticked that box, but for the rest is a lot of work that still needs to go into that.
A lot of work has to be done still.
Yes.
Ingeborg, there are already rules and laws in place to protect wildlife. What are the most important laws? Parties at the North Sea.
Yeah, well, the nature protection legislation law, nature protection law, I think it is in English, yes. That's the most important one for us. I work for an assignment of the Ministry of Economic Affairs, who wants to roll out the offshore wind energy, but they have to do it within the boundaries of the nature legislation. So that's the main thing, and the species that are protected by that law have special attention to look at them if there's not too much effect on them.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a question on this. We're talking about knowledge development, gathering more data. That's an important subject. You mentioned knowledge gaps that still exist. I was just wondering how many birds are actually tagged that we can follow with GPS? Is that like 0.5% of them or even less? Because if sufficient number of birds would be tagged, then they could almost themselves shut down the wind farms when they are approaching. You see that happening also with aviation lights, for example, that can be controlled by signals from aircraft. Is that something that's imaginable, that we start tagging more and more birds?
Well, several things to say about it. We have tagged gulls, large gulls and terns, to see what their flight pattern is when they're at the colonies. So you can see how far off they get at sea, if they're near offshore wind farm, if they avoid them, to come back to the nests, because there's a big urge to go back to that place. So you can easily follow them. And then you can see, how much risk they have. And they stay, but how many birds do you tag? I don't know, 30 to 50 or something.
Okay, so these are relatively small numbers.
So that's
they're not representative of the total.
No, but they show you what patterns they have, and you can do it more often. You get a better idea. But we've done it 3 years, I think, so we have rather good idea.
For migrating birds, how is that?
For migrating, but for the small passerines, we didn't do that at all because some birds they don't. They start off in Scandinavia, or where do they come from? So it is not our. It's difficult to do that in other countries. You have to work together with other countries to get the complete route to get information about that. And we're not yet there.
And researchers do work together, so there are some interesting studies of these yearly migration patterns of many types of birds. And even if you have a low number of birds that are followed using GPS sensors, then still that's amazing what you get. And of course, they have amazing tracks that they indeed they are in summer they are in Scandinavia, and then in winter they are all in South Africa. Many species have these migration distances, and we know their paths from these types of measurements and studies, but the exact timing, that would be important for curtailment. So for stopping turbines, you would need to know more about the exact timing, and then you would start to need a model, and that's what currently is being developed. So the University of Amsterdam developed a model which predicts when many birds will pass the North Sea during a certain night, and then we can do curtailment during that night. So this will be tested coming spring, and I think it's very exciting and very promising and very good that the Dutch government is now taking action to start with this.
And are they working together with other countries? Because everybody has this problem, or a lot of countries. Question.
Yes, but at the North Sea level, not enough yet.
No.
This will be where we will need to go to really get together with all the countries and really tune our efforts, do combined efforts to get more insight, and then also tune our developments to each other to make sure that we do the best as possible to do good implementation of the wind farms at the North Sea level.
Yeah, Bob, the energy and nature transition take place simultaneously. What do you think are the pros and cons of this situation, in your opinion?
Pros and cons. I would say that this is, I think, a great opportunity. So both transitions taking place. We have to act now in this respect. We can't wait until 2030 when the problems really start getting bigger and bigger, as we've seen with those projections of the wind farms. So gathering knowledge, but also developing, say, mitigating strategies. Whether this is technical or maybe more in terms of spatial planning or even ethical, we have to develop those before it's too late. So I think there's a real opportunity now to start working even harder on this very important topic.
If I might just say, Bob, I would say that actually the Netherlands needs to get a lot of credit because it's highly density in terms of the number of radar used to actually gather the data in Europe. So I would say, it's a lot of credit to the government here as well, and all the research and all the development that's going into that to actually get the best technology, to actually get the thorough data, because we've got the opportunity to work in different countries, as far as, sort of South America now at the moment, or Tasmania. So we are very spread around, but I've seen the intensity and the work going into the Netherlands to create models and to develop solutions, which is very, very strong and very nice to see in terms of the enthusiasm and the forthcoming and all the effort put into that type of subject.
That is good to hear, of course, but we see very much the problem that the speed of the increase of the offshore wind farms is much larger than the speed of the development of the knowledge, and that's a struggle for us. We have some, if you look at the cumulative effect assessment, there's so many assumptions and uncertainties still, and it's improving. So it's parallel, I think. You just go along trying to implement the offshore wind and increasing the knowledge. But it's very important that it stays connected. Yeah.
Do you look for help also to other countries? If the Netherlands is really taking a lead in this, other countries may support this as well?
We try to work together, but as Tim said, it is not enough yet. It is rather difficult. We sit around a table with the North Sea countries, and we have the same issues we want to understand. We work on the same things.
It's also European legislation that we all have to follow. So it's a joint problem.
But the countries approach it differently. And therefore the attention is sometimes differently. But we have good contacts, and we try to do it project by project. So we're doing something now with our porpoises, and we work with the Danish people because they have good experience there.
Well, I think it's almost the end of part one. Time goes fast in this subject. But Sibylle, I would love to give you one more chance to just say something. And before, because you are going to leave us in part two, can you just, or what you need or what you want to say or promote?
No, for us, it's really important, and I think it's really nice to see all the industry specific knowledge coming together to try to find solution and try to. We also, as Robin, see ourselves as facilitators, providing the tools for enhancing research and being able to, find the right balance between the growth and also sustainable way of doing so. So for us, it's great opportunity to be welcome in such a discussion, because technology is going fast and is improving, but for us it's also good to understand what is needed to be able to work towards that. And we've got a strong research department within our company, and we always try to get the feedback from the industry and people that have got the knowledge to be able to get better and to provide better solution in the future. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll know how to find you.
Absolutely.
So, and Ingeborg and Tim, of course, also. So thank you so much. In the second part, let's take a quick look into the future. Thank you, Sibylle.
Okay.
Yes, it was a very quick movement here. So we're in the second part of this 12th edition of TKI Wind op Zee Live, and I would like to introduce you to our next guest, and that is André Craens. He's a sector specialist at the Netherlands Wind Energy Association, the NWEA. I practiced that. André, you're over there. Welcome. You'll present the industry's vision on the cohabitation of offshore wind farms and wildlife. I would say, take it away, André.
Thank you very much. We're trying to solve here two crises: climate change and biodiversity loss. And offshore wind can play a significant role in addressing both by producing clean energy and making offshore wind farms places where nature can blossom. The industry has set as goal to minimize or mitigate negative impact as much as possible, and also focus on nature enhancement potential inside wind farms to create a positive impact on the local biodiversity. And below the water surface, a lot of good things are happening. But however, below water surface, a lot of good things are happening, but above the water surface is challenging. Some bird species may be especially impacted by habitat loss due to wind farms or due to collisions with the blades of wind turbines. And the offshore industry recognizes these negative impacts. And therefore, ecology is a theme that is integrated in the development of offshore wind. For example, it has a formal place in the site decisions, in the multi-use procedure, and in the tender criteria. And last but not least, a healthy ecology is a hard requirement from the government for the rollout of the roadmap, the 2030 roadmap for offshore wind energy. Wind farm operators make efforts to facilitate researchers accessing wind farms and adding sensory and gaining more understanding about the impact of offshore wind turbines is the largest challenge. Unfortunately, the North Sea has degraded a lot before the first offshore wind turbine was installed. And today's issues are mostly not caused by offshore wind farms and cannot all be solved by the wind industry alone. A good understanding of the positive and negative drivers is core to be successful. And therefore, an holistic view and approach is key to improve the situation for impacted species. The previous TKI live session was about robotization on offshore wind farms and was titled No Hands on Deck. And for this episode, I think we can say all hands on deck, because we need to have everybody to work together. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about making the smartest ideas working in the little time we have. We need NGOs to raise awareness and challenge the conversation and bring in fresh ideas. We need innovators from inside and outside the industry to work on new solutions. And we need researchers to understand drivers for population loss and growth, as well understand the innovations that work and what's not. And then the government, they have a unique role in setting the rules and organizing research, and also creating a level playing field, and assigning protected areas, including alignment with neighboring countries around us, because species don't limit themselves by country borders. And in the short term, we need to focus on what is necessary to improve the situation for impacted species. And in the long term, we need to continue every day what we can do to make a healthy and robust North Sea.
So, thank you, André. Thank you very much for that presentation. And you'll take a seat at our table to join our discussion. Great to have you here. And once again, for you at home, if you would like to ask any question, please do that via the chat or on the comments on LinkedIn. Let's continue our conversation here, share ideas about what is needed to achieve a positive impact on nature. Let's focus on what's happening above sea level. As we already said, Bob, when you hear André talking and you hear the vision that André just presented, is that the start of a paradigm shift that's needed to have our energy generation and wildlife be balanced?
Yeah, maybe. And I think what I'd like to hear also from André's presentation is this all hands on deck. So it is really a joint effort that we have to pull off together here. And I think the North Sea Agreement forms a good basis of that. So it encourages also cooperation and research, further research in WOZEP and the MONS program. So knowledge gathering remains very important. And that's what I also hear from André's presentation. I think also finding solutions on the shorter term based on the knowledge we have now. For example, we've already heard a discussion about, for example, radar detection and then having a kind of curtailment protocol, which could be a solution. Forecasting migration of birds and having curtailment solutions for that. But I think we also must try to develop even further solutions, things that we don't know yet. And of course, that's our innovation program is also targeted at those new solutions. I think, for example, if you look at, say, spatial mitigation, of course, we feel very much confined to our own exclusive economic zone. And so we try to position all those wind farms within that area, and then we start encountering potential areas with high bird densities and issues for scaling up. But if we would, for example, make the solution space larger, for example, looking also at international cooperation, also mentioned a couple of times, and for example, we would start building out wind farms further north, beyond our own exclusive economic zone, say in Danish waters. Maybe the water's deeper there, so probably a bit more expensive to construct wind farms, but deeper waters probably means less seabirds because they can't find food there in 40, 50 meters water depth. So I would also like to propose, say, other type of solution, thinking out of the box in terms of getting out of this potential constraint. I'm also interested in the views, of course, of you, Ingeborg, and Tim.
Just a small correction that, of course, some seabirds, they can find plenty of fish in some very deep waters. So
they're good divers.
Yeah, well, so you need to study if it's an important area for birds or not. But you, of course, open up new areas where you could maybe which would be better than the ones you would have selected otherwise.
But you would need more data on that.
Would need more data.
Yeah.
But I would like to challenge Bob a bit that he has given a presentation in summer where he showed that the wind energy sector is quite proud of having larger wind mills, wind turbines, even up to 300 meters. And that is becoming cheaper per gigawatt generated. And I missed a little bit. I missed a lot the focus on what is the ecological impact. Probably if you have larger turbines, they're spaced further apart, but they are higher, so they have a higher range of the blades. These are all things that are not studied, and they are not even questioned at the start of the process. So Bob is telling us he's working a lot on innovation, but now the challenging question is now indeed being addressed.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very good remark, and thanks for making that. I think if you look at wind turbine size and the way it works out in the models that we use for collisions of birds, I think in general it's like that larger rotors have less impact. I think that's correct.
Because you need less turbines in an area.
Yeah. And but I also saw from your presentation that, for example, if the lowest tip position would be beyond, say, 25 meters, then at least one species becomes, say, less impacted. So also maybe not larger rotors, but higher rotors could be a solution. So that could also be beneficial for energy production. There's more wind at higher levels. But I think you're absolutely right. So there is a trade-off to be made in terms of the design of the wind turbine and the impact on ecology. But before you would take any conclusions from that, I think we must say corroborate for example, also the models with sufficient data that we can actually rely on this data to be guiding us in the right direction. And I'm not sure if we're there yet in terms of knowledge development, that we are certain that larger rotors mean less impact. Is that so?
It's a mathematical thing, I think, now.
Sorry?
What does that mean?
Well, that you can, in the models, you can calculate it. And then you see that less turbines, bigger blades, that eventually have less victims.
But there's not actual...
No, the proof is always to measure it in the field. And that's still very difficult. Yes.
Yeah, we need more radars to...
Well, more, and the cameras, etc. So that's...
But coming back to Tim's remark, because I do feel as a challenge with this remark, and would it make sense to do more research specifically in this area, looking at the shape and size of turbines related to bird impact?
Well, it will help a lot if we can follow in more detail how different bird species use a wind farm, because many of them will still enter the wind farm and actually have no problem with the wind turbines at all. Others will have problems with it, but if we now start studying their behavior more, we can also learn and predict better what new types of wind turbines, what impact they will have. And this
your remark also reflects maybe the focus that we historically have, for example, on cost reduction. So maybe, say, smaller or the same size wind turbines are more cost-effective in the future, but they would have maybe more impact on birds. And maybe this is also where, say, site selection comes more in play. I suggested to move further north, but maybe in other directions as well. I don't know. But clever site selection, also giving the specific characteristics of species could be a solution.
Yeah. That's a good step forward in time. In the beginning, there was ecology was not a part of the selection process, and now it is. It's really a topic, so they take it into account. Yeah.
When we talk about this, you hear a lot about, of course, preserving nature on the North Sea. There's a lot of talk and there's a lot of attention for endangered species. Is it just how that's presented, or is the focus really on the strongest endangered species, Ingeborg?
Basically, yes. We look at the protected species because that is... before you get a permit for the site decisions, you have to analyze if there's what the impact will be. So that's coupled to the law. So it's very precise, but that's one part of the story where we do that research. So we have especially the protected species, but we want to also understand the cause-effect relations and the context of the species in the North Sea. Yeah. So if, for instance, You see, you know everything about collisions and their behavior, how they avoid the parks, etc. But that's one way to look at it. And on the other side, you know that because of the amount of turbines in the North Sea, the system changes. The physical processes are affected, and that knocks on to the food chain, eventually to the food of the birds. So if it could be that the fish is not anymore at the place where they used to be because of the physical, and then the relations are changing. So then maybe the birds have a different area where they stay. So different area become their preference areas. Yeah. So we look at that too. So you can say WOZEP is very much focused on the protected species. And yes, that is true, because that is where economic affairs has to be. Look at. But we look further. So especially because of the plans more in the future, the bigger, the much larger scale effects and how that will affect it. So, well, this is the time to look at that. Otherwise, you're too late. And we try to have the best information to give to the policymakers to make their decisions for.
And for example, say climate change, say warmer waters, would that also impact the abundance of food for seabirds, for example? So they move further north. I don't know. Is that could that be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not the huge impact of the climate change. And last week we were at the North Sea Days, and there was a nice talk of someone who said, he talked about the harbour porpoise, other species, but we are at the south part of their area that they use. So if climate changes causes for increase of temperature, the harbour porpoise goes north. So that's very important if you want to calculate effects.
So many.
So what is
parameters? Yes.
I have a question from the audience. Is there time for that now? Question from Leo. It's about multi-use of offshore wind farms. If aquaculture would be introduced into wind farms, how would that affect the risk for birds?
It is a very good question, because it could go several ways. So we really would like to have that studied in more detail. On the one hand, they could even find it as a place where they find food more easily. It could also become a trap for some birds that enter wind farms, and then they hit a turbine blade. So we are not sure yet what will be the impact. And I liked it that you also lighted out the ecosystem effects we can expect with wind turbines. They can have effects on stratification, all kinds of effects at the lower levels of the food web. With aquaculture, it's the same. It might also impact on the nutrient use in the water, and that might impact other parts of the ecosystem. And how that will translate to food for birds is also a big question mark. So these are
very complex.
Yeah. So if you do aquaculture at a significant level, then it might really have also serious ecosystem impacts.
And it is, for example, this attracting function maybe of aquaculture in wind farms. I also heard a story about, for example, the navigation lights and the aeronautical warning lights on wind turbines, that they may also attract birds. That could also be a risk. Are you also looking at those effects?
No, not at the moment. But there could be risks and opportunities in that.
André, a question for you. So what will be the biggest task for the offshore wind industry to accomplish a net positive impact on nature?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, I think, because what I said in my story too, you have to work all together, and it's quite complex. There is a negative impact of the wind turbines, but there are also other drivers of negative impact. So we need to understand this holistic view. What are those impact drivers, and also we need to enforce nature. So in my opinion, we cannot wait till all the research is done, but we already have to do the steps to do what we can do for those species to make sure they can survive, and that also the rollout of wind energy, which we also need to fight climate change, that also can proceed. Yeah.
Who do you need to achieve your goals? Do you need?
Well, I think, of course, the wind industry itself has a role. Yeah. So, and then there is the innovators that help, inside and outside the industry, and then there's research. Because you need to understand what, if you make a change, if there's a negative impact, that you need to understand. But if you do something to have positive impact, you need to see which ones work best. And then there's also the government, because aside the marine spatial planning, that's decided by the government. So there's a lot of things that are driven by the government. And it's also, you need to have like a bit overall view, which is harder for in the market. Those are separate companies. They just do a site, and then they're lucky to win one, and then the other one. So on that level, it's more difficult than, for example, an international perspective, because that's the reality of these species.
Yeah, it's all I hear is it all has to work together, and it's all very complex, and we don't know a lot yet, but we're working on it.
Absolutely.
We're working. What are the most pressing pieces of information now at this moment? We need to work towards a good balance between nature and energy. What do you think?
Yeah, I think on the short term, the gannet who is vulnerable, and the behavior of these species, to get more knowledge about how he behaves, how he avoids the turbines, if it's in the park or more outside, so the micro and meso and avoidance of these species, to know more about the flight height, so we have better calculations of the victims. I think that is important, but also to start now on those ecosystem effects, because that's more long term. But if it's already going that way, then it's much more difficult to change it again. So, yeah.
But we're also looking at, say, more short-term solutions, maybe. So what about the black blades? Is that going to save us, do you think, Ingeborg? Or?
Well, maybe it all helps a little. Well, you can't see the black blade at night, for instance. So that's a good point. We
have more lights on it.
Yeah, but maybe it's easy and it already helps a bit. Yeah. So I'm not negative about it. No.
Do you have a view on that, Tim?
Yeah, well, at the moment there's the large experiment in Eemshaven, which is running. And I'm very curious about the outcome there, because it will tell us more about if it works in the Dutch situation as compared with the Norwegian situation, where it was tested for the first time. But then if we translate it to offshore and the migrations of birds we have there, then we might even need to do another pilot phase. But let's first wait and see what comes out of the Eemshaven experiment. It's a nice experiment.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. And then there's the black blade, but maybe what you said, maybe with lights or with sounds.
Yeah, lights and sounds.
And then there is, I think, if you really look like futuristic, there can be like a kind of retail curtailment. This is already happening on land, which I heard once, that LiDAR technology is spotting eagles, and this one we don't want to have collide, so the wind turbine stops, and then when the eagle is gone, the wind turbine starts again. This is, I would say, technology is not the issue here. We just need to get ourselves organized to get this technology in place.
And how do you get yourself organized then?
Well, that comes in with a lot of actors, I think. I named them, but I think you need to have all hands on deck here.
Yeah, if I can respond to that, I think in the Dutch context, the North Sea Agreement and the North Sea negotiation, the regular meeting, is an important way of organizing this. That's where all the stakeholders come together, and we have good agreements, good agreement made, and that's a good basis to further expand our solutions, ideas for solutions for this major problem. But also I'd like to take a little bit of time to define nature positive offshore wind, because that's the title of this meeting. But I really think we should define it well, and we should all define it in the same way. Because what it means to me, and I think I hope it means to everybody, is that we have an expansion of offshore wind, because we need this for the energy transition. And at the same time, we want to restore nature. And we cannot only do it by mitigation measures. We cannot only do it by having wind farms that are designed in a smart way. No, we need to restore nature at the same time. And you said the North Sea was already in a degraded state. And indeed, it didn't make it to a good environmental status, which it should have had in 2020, according to EU regulations. So now we get a new evaluation in 2023, and this is a bit of a spoiler alert, but don't expect us to meet the good environmental status for the North Sea. So this is the challenge. So what we now need to do is to go full speed ahead with nature restoration, while at the same time doing a very smart, well-planned way of wind energy implementation in the North Sea. And this means protection of areas. It means species protection. Those are the key elements. And from there on, you could reach something you could call a nature-positive offshore wind.
Yeah.
And I think, well, I think the wind energy sector is very much on the same page with this, with us. And I think many other stakeholders as well, and the government. But it's good to have this in mind. This is what we mean by it, and that's why we now need to speed up the nature restoration, because it's lagging behind, and I see lots of efforts at the ministry, but I also see bottlenecks where we have, for instance, the common fisheries policy, which is really slow, and we don't have proper protection of areas at the moment. So this is also part of this nature-positive offshore wind.
Very good that you made that very clear. Thank you so much. Could you quickly respond to that, because I see at the time we're almost done with the time. Quickly, a last response to this, what Tim said.
True, we need to address two crises, and therefore I think this holistic view is also important. It's not just the nature and the wind, but we need to look broader and see, to get everybody on board.
Yeah. And maybe reduce other pressures than just the wind energy. It's the newest one, but it's we have other pressures that we need to tackle, and maybe also have innovations, many innovations there at the same time. It's as much needed as innovation in the wind energy sector.
Thank you so much. Ingeborg, last quote for you.
Yeah, I don't have a new one, but I totally agree. You can't focus only on offshore wind to get the solutions over there. You must do your best for that, but look broader to solve the problem.
Very good shout out there. Thank you so much. It's time to wrap things up. Yeah, Bob, we've reached the end of this edition. It went too fast. It always goes too fast. Of the TKI Wind op Zee Live. I believe, well, it's all types of innovation to solve, technical innovations, ethical questions to be answered. What do you take with you after this edition, Bob?
Well, many things. We haven't really cracked the problem, but I wasn't expecting that in this call. I want to thank, of course, the people around the table, also Tim, for putting us on target with, say, a larger, I would say, environment than just focusing on offshore wind. It is a large ecosystem. It is above and below the waterline. It is international, and there are many stakeholders building up pressures on the system, but also potentially many solutions. So that's where the hope comes from. It also, from, say, an innovation and knowledge development program, I think we're also challenged in supporting further knowledge developments. And I'm a physicist, so I tend to immediately look for technical solutions, whether it's a black blade or lights or sounds or things like that. But it is a much wider issue that we're dealing with. And so working both on potentially technical solutions, whether this has to do with design of wind turbines, wind farms, location selection, etc., or black blades. But also, I think, looking at, say, other impacts. The impact, for example, of climate change on, for example, birds and bats and where they best live. But also maybe looking at other solutions. So that there may be situations that we can no longer trade off. As you suggested, you can't trade off one thing for the other. It's a complete view. But if we can no longer trade it off, what are we going to do then? And I think from that perspective, it is nice to point out that there is an open call from NWO for academic research in this area, ecology and offshore wind. And there we will also try to bring, say, many diverse backgrounds together. So it is policy, it is legislation, but it's also ethics potentially that plays a role, but also the technology and ecology. So building up knowledge, trying to find solutions, and looking at this very large perspective of a large ecosystem. Hopefully fills our toolbox with sufficient tools for 2030 to be able to work with this and improve nature and mitigate climate change with offshore wind. So, yeah, I'm hopeful. Yeah.
Good. Thanks so much, Bob. There are some agenda issues you'd like in this very quick last minute.
Yeah, well, maybe so. When this is all wrapped up, something say on a different topic, we are updating our innovation program, and we're consulting with many of you on this. But we also publish a version for wider feedback on the innovation program. You'll hear more about that in our newsletters. So that's one thing. Another thing is that I'd like to encourage you, if you have good ideas, for example, about, say, mitigating impacts or improving the state of nature offshore, that you can win awards for innovation through the Offshore Wind Innovators Awards. That are currently programmed to be handed out on January 25. But until December 14th, you still have time to join this race for these awards. And it will only take you a couple of minutes to fill out a form on this. So look at our website or Google Offshore Wind Innovators Awards, and you'll find how to do this.
Apply until December 14th.
December 14th is the deadline, and the awards will be given in January 25. So
super. Thank you so much, Bob. That concludes this edition of TKI Wind op Zee Live. I would really like to thank all of our guests here in the studio today. Tim, Sibylle, André and Ingeborg, thank you very much. And Bob, of course, still hopeful. That's good news. I want to thank you for the audience for watching. Please let us know how you appreciate this edition. And we would love to see you next year when we will continue the TKI Wind op Zee Live. Thank you.